My name's Brandon and this is Nickelodeon Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Nickelodeon shows and retrospectively review them. After a small taste of SpongeBob early in 2001 with Legend of the Lost Spatula on the Game Boy Color, the yellow square has returned in the same year for his home console debut. It might be a little bit of a stretch to make a big deal out of it though, because SuperSponge was released on the GBA as well as the PlayStation 1. And when you compare the two versions, they're actually very similar. In a few weeks' time, we'll have Revenge of the Flying Dutchman on our hands, which is the first SpongeBob game to really take advantage of the power of a home console. Released on November 5, 2001, just 2 days after Rocket Power Dream Scheme, and 4 days before Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius on the GBA, SuperSponge was developed by Climax Studios. Longtime fans of the channel will instantly recognise that name. They're responsible for Ed, Edd n Eddy Jawbreakers and Adventure Time Pirates of the Enchiridion. We also see them pop up again for Nicktoons Unite, where they had control over the Nintendo DS version. One of the most interesting things about SuperSponge is how much behind the scenes info is available. In 2016, a user uploaded the source code and much of the development assets for the PS1 version to the Internet Archive, giving everybody an interesting peek behind the curtain. 3 years later, the same thing happened for the GBA version. I highly recommend having a look at the pages for these games on the cutting room floor, as it's pretty fascinating. Or if you really want to get hands-on, go and download all the files yourself. Unsurprisingly, considering SpongeBob's rise to prominence at the time, SuperSponge was a commercial hit. It sold over 1 million copies on the PS1, leading to PlayStation re-releasing the game as part of the PlayStation Greatest Hits collection the following year. And it was critically successful too. Both versions of the game landed around a 6.8 average review score, further demonstrating just how similar the two releases are. There's honestly a lot of good momentum behind SuperSponge. Let's head down to Bikini Bottom and check out SpongeBob's first and last game on the PS1.
Blast you, Sponge Breath! You have found my secret time machine! Whatever you do, make sure you fill it up before you bring it back!
The differences between SuperSponge on the PS1 and SuperSponge on the GBA that I've found have been relatively minor, hence why I'm just reviewing the PS1 version. Mostly, the GBA graphics are less detailed, there's no voice acting, and the way health works is slightly altered. The Shakespearean story in SuperSponge is entirely focused on SpongeBob doing fetch quests for Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Patrick's birthday is coming up and SpongeBob wants to get their autographs for him as a present. Naturally, the old coots want nothing to do with him, so they continuously send him on errands, with the end goal of killing him so they're free of his harassment. The game's divided up into chapters based on the various items SpongeBob has been tasked with retrieving. There's 5 of these in total, with like 5 or so levels inside of each of them. Being a PS1 game, you might be a little shocked to see that SuperSponge is a 2D platformer. Sony wanted to push the 3D graphical capabilities hard with the OG PlayStation, resulting in the vast majority of the library being built around 3D. SuperSponge actually really stands out on this console. It just doesn't fit on the PS1 and feels way more at home on the GBA. The concept is pretty basic, with the gameplay being a simplistic left to right side scroller. Some later levels do get a little more creative and tricky with their level layouts, but mostly the way levels progress are designed to be accessible for newer gamers. Being aimed at that younger demographic, the first chapter of SuperSponge is super basic. Anyone over the age of 5 will sleepwalk right through it. SpongeBob's default arsenal is similarly basic. You can jump and do a ground pound. That's it. Every single level in the game is just about you getting from A to B, but along the way they'll try and tempt you with spatulas. Collecting 100 of these bad boys will grant you an extra life, but Climax have somehow made this feel really awkward. For example, in a Mario game, there's well over 100 coins found in many levels, and you'll also have your coin count carry over as you progress. In SuperSponge, there's exactly 100 spatulas in every level. No more, no less. Also, your spatula count doesn't carry over. Once you finish a level, you start back at 0 again. Spatulas act as your health, like rings in Sonic. As long as you have at least one spatula, you can't die, except for in a couple of very specific circumstances. Actively going after the spatulas is utterly pointless. There are extra life tokens scattered throughout for you to collect, meaning going after 100 spatulas is ridiculous, especially because chasing them down often results in you getting hurt and having less spatulas than when you started. While the game suckers you in with its baby ass beginning chapter, it's all to set up one of the most insane difficulty spikes. Chapter 2 is an unbelievable jump in difficulty. I didn't die a single time in Chapter 1, but managed to see the game over screen pretty quickly in Chapter 2. If this blink of an eye change was jarring and a struggle for me, I could only imagine how a kid would have dealt with it. Hitting the game over screen allows you to pick off exactly where you were, but you only get 3 continues before you bite the dust for good. I hate this kind of design. As I've said numerous times, it's a dinosaur-ass archaic holdover from the arcade days. Guys, I already gave you money for the game, you don't have to try and extract quarters from me anymore. In general, I found that SuperSponge is just a really poorly designed platformer. The majority of your obstacles in this game will be enemies and spikes. Some late game levels involve tricky jumps over bottomless pits, but they're definitely a minority. What I found was that when combined with the spatula health system, I could simply run headfirst at any obstacle, take damage, abuse the moment of invincibility the game gives you after taking a hit, and then recollect my spatulas. The question is, why does this system work in Sonic, but not here? Well, I believe it comes down to the fundamental ideas behind the two games. In Sonic, your main goal is to go fast. The devs want you to be flying through levels at a fast pace, so the health system accommodates that. SuperSponge isn't at all trying to be like Sonic though. It's not about getting players to race through levels, so instead you're left with a broken system allowing things to happen that the developers clearly didn't intend for. In one of Chapter 4's levels, I literally completed the whole thing in roughly 15 seconds just by sprinting to the end and not caring about damage. You've definitely screwed up the design of your game when 90% of obstacles are solved more efficiently by deliberately taking damage rather than trying to skillfully platform past them. To break up your constant spamming of the right D-pad button, Climax have a host of special abilities throughout the game. Immediately you'll be introduced to the jellyfish net. This gives SpongeBob the power to catch jellyfish floating around levels and then toss them at enemies to remove them from your path. The problem with this is that the trajectory of the jellyfish net throw is ridiculous. SpongeBob throws it out at a reasonable height you would expect from an attack like this, but then it drops like a sack of bricks. It's not intuitive to use, and I pretty much ignored it entirely after the first chapter. You go through that chapter with only a single ability / weapon being introduced, but in the second chapter they go into overdrive, introducing some new gimmick in basically every level. You'll find balloons to make you float, the squeaky boots that help you platform better on certain surfaces, I think. They didn't really explain that one too well. There's also a karate glove that will randomly disappear, and then the coral blower. Fundamentally, the coral blower is the same as the jellyfish net. You suck up ammo and then point and shoot at your desired target. This time it comes with the additional function of destroying walls that are in your way. It's fine in theory, but in execution it stinks. Firstly, wearing the coral blower alters your movement. Platforming controls are fine in this game, but wearing this makes SpongeBob sluggish and a chore to control. And then you find out that you can only pick up one bit of ammo at a time while using it. There are numerous times in the game where they ask you to destroy multiple walls in a row, forcing you to run back and forth while wearing this cumbersome nuisance. These moments were easily my least favourite in the game. I couldn't wait to leave this annoying thing in the dust. I guess the one positive I can say about all of these weapons and abilities is that they don't completely abandon them. Later levels see them being combined slightly, but it's very half-assed and not very engaging. The last aspect of the gameplay I wanted to touch on was the boss battles, because of course we needed end of chapter boss battles. I don't think it'll come as a surprise to hear me say they're awful. SuperSponge's bosses range from being confusing to clunky to incredibly easy to cheese your way through. Each boss battle gives you a hint towards how to defeat it before starting. The first fight was with a giant jellyfish, with the hint telling me that I had to throw jellyfish at it because it was scared of jellyfish. They also clearly had no idea what to include for these boss battles. Most SpongeBob games boil down to Plankton being the antagonist, with him employing some sort of army of machines. This game doesn't really have an antagonist though, so you're mostly having boss fights for no real reason. Outside of the Flying Dutchman fight, they're all random creations. I mean, the game ends with a boss fight against SpongeBob's arch nemesis. the Iron Dogfish. It's reminiscent of stuff like the early Simpsons games, where developers didn't really know too much or have a whole lot of material to work with, so they had to invent random villains or weirdly glom onto really minor characters. Oh, and how could I forget the end cutscene? Just watch this nonsense.
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday! Meow, 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 meow!
Happy birthday! Happy birthday! Happy birthday! Happy birthday!
Happy birthday!
Stand still while I take your picture.
All around me are familiar faces.
So I've trashed most of the gameplay aspects, but SuperSponge actually manages to shine brightly when it comes to presentation. Early builds of this game apparently experimented with 3D models, but they eventually settled on a sprite-based system, possibly to make it easier to adapt for the GBA. The characters look really damn good in my opinion, and the animations are really expressive. You can find a whole bunch of these posted online as GIFs, and they give you a great look at them close up. The backgrounds and levels look nice as well. Environments were constantly changing, meaning new levels were never dull to jump into. Climax Studios decided to go the extra mile and include full voice acting for all dialogue. Not something one would expect in a 2D platformer.
Thanks, kid. Look, kid, Eminem has had a turn, the TV is broken, and unless you get the right tools, he's gonna miss his favorite cartoon. Can you help?
Does a snail meow? You bet!
This is a fun addition for the cutscenes. My only negative is the voice actor for Mr. Krabs. For some reason, Clancy Brown, the iconic voice of Mr. Krabs, often doesn't do the voice in video games. This can be seen most notably in Battle for Bikini Bottom, and it's present here too. The replacement voice is not good, but Krabs is such a minor part of the game that it doesn't really matter. On the flip side, this is one of the only games where Ernest Borgnine voices Mermaid Man. On the complete opposite of the spectrum to the Mr. Krabs voice performance is this game's soundtrack. Good lord, who gave the composer permission to go so hard here? Basically every track in this game slaps, and while I was having a pretty miserable time with the gameplay, the music definitely helped make it a more bearable experience. SuperSponge is not good. It's not fun, and there's too many fundamental errors and failures to get any serious enjoyment out of it. At the core, it's just very clunky. The actual platforming controls are fine, but the way levels are constructed and laid out is terrible. There's no flow to anything, and you just end up resorting to blindly running through all obstacles. They introduce too many gameplay ideas when it comes to the weapons and abilities. Heck, I'm just now remembering that I didn't mention the bubble blowing platforms or the jellyfish gun. All of these are forgettable or half-baked, and they really don't add much when, like I said, the best way to solve any problem in SuperSponge is to blindly run. If it wasn't for the solid graphics and the banging soundtrack, I probably wouldn't have had anything positive to say about it. Here's hoping that Revenge of the Flying Dutchman will be a better experience. Next time I'll be taking a look at Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, the game based on the film. While the home console version didn't release until a little bit later, the GBA version popped up in November of 2001. I'll be reviewing both of these versions next time, and it'll be interesting to see how they turn out. This release is one of the early examples of Nick putting out two radically different games based on the platform they appear on. Hopefully Boy Genius will be a blast on both accounts. To make sure you don't miss out, hit the subscribe button.